Welcome, Stacy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure.
Let's see if I can get sharing to work for the second time in one day.
Exactly.
Hopefully you will see a nice black and white picture now.
Indeed, we can see that.
Okay, and so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for spending the time with us this evening. This is my last talk of 2020 and yeah, I can't wait to give it. So, and then my clicker doesn't work, of course. Come on, you can do it, computer. There we go. So at my previous company, which was a large financial advice website, we were late to the continuous integration and continuous deployment party. We did have a release flow. It kind of worked for us. It had enough flexibility that we could do hot fixes within a couple of hours, and we went to production twice a week. It wasn't bad, but it was also really cumbersome. There was a huge amount of manual effort involved in getting our site out of source control and into production. We did have some automation, but it was just PowerShell scripts, and they had to be run manually at the right time or things broke. It was kind of fault intolerant. And on top of all of these things, developers had no idea what it took to actually get to production. They didn't know the process that was behind the scenes. They didn't know all of the complexities. It was out of date. As developers, we wanted to work in a more modern way. We wanted to get fast feedback. We wanted to know that we were building the right thing. And we also wanted to know that we were building it in the right way. So we spent a lot of time, effort, sweat, tears, and of course, money to try and move our pipeline forward. So after all of that, we were doing continuous integration and delivery. No. Like a lot of companies in this situation, we were still at the start of our journey, because it's not only that tooling that you need to do something about. You also need to help people with this. And people, they can really struggle with change, even if there's really good reasons for doing so. After all, smoking kills. People still smoke. Drinking isn't that healthy, and people still like a drink. Motorbikes are probably the most dangerous standard form of transport that we have. I still love riding bikes, much to my mum's disappointment. Things take longer than we would like. Sometimes that pace of change can seem glacially slow. You want to get going here. You know what you want to do, and you're running. Other people, they're like a baby giraffe. They're still struggling to find their feet. And yet others around you, they're actively digging their heels in. They are trying to slow you down and trying to stop you. I would like to tell you a little bit about my journey of frustration, of errors, some of the things that I've learned along the way. I don't have any solutions to problems today, I'm afraid, partly because I don't believe there are any magic solutions to these things, because I don't believe there's one solution to each problem. Within one company, within one department, even inside of one team, you're going to have a range of personalities. And it's going to mean that your problems, and so your solutions, they're kind of going to need to be tailored to your team. But I invite you to take a look at the mistakes that I made and go away and make your own new ones. Hi, I'm Stacy Cashmore. I have been a software developer since the mid-1990s, and I'm a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies. Now, the company I'm going to talk about, a previous employer, I worked there for 14 years. And when I started back in the mid-2000s, I had the honor of helping implement the first real release flow that they used to update their site. Just before I left, I had the honor of helping them kick off the process of killing that release flow and replacing it with something more agile, more fault tolerant. And in this session, I'm just going to go through two stories of things that we did, issues that we had, non-technical problems that we had, and some of the things we learned whilst doing so. But before I do that, I do want to quickly mention tooling, at least touch it. Because if we're going to automate things and if we're going to make changes, then we kind of need it. And with current technology, I'm not going to say it's simple, but it's doable. There's lots of tools out there that can help us with this. And you can make yourself a complete system to track your changes, to track your build, your deployments, to help you implement feature toggles for trunk-based development and get all of the insights that you can get at every step of that journey. And it doesn't matter. Because if people are unafraid and unsure about the things you're doing with this system, they're going to find whatever way they can not to use it. And even a perfect system, it's not that useful if people just use it once a month for 1,000 file merge. So yeah, tooling is really important. But in this journey, it's not the silver bullet. The people involved, they're just as maybe more important. And they are so much harder to take on that journey with you. And that's because they have feelings. People can really get scared about changes that you're making. They may fear the impact to their job. They may fear unwanted side effects on quality that they see as a problem that's coming in. And if we're going to help people through this, we've got to make sure we take them on that journey with us and not just put that journey on top of them. Now, my first story, it stems from how easy it is to fall back into old patterns sometimes, and some of the reasons that people do. The story starts mid-2018, a couple of years ago now. We made a decision as a department to try and implement trunk-based development. Now, this caused a lot of fear, a lot of stress, even resentment to some of the people in the team. And I was also one of the people that got scared and stressed about this because I'd seen the issues that we had when we were merging our projects into our trunk. And I really didn't want to be looking at that on a daily basis. But it hit me that thinking like that misses the point. Moving to trunk-based development, it's not going to solve any of our problems. It's going to show you the changes that you need to do in order to try and make it work. And that was a mindset change for me. Something really went click in my head, and I started to get really excited about this journey. I really wanted to make it work, and I was so looking forward to the challenge. Within my team, there were different views. Some people, they were still really worried and really concerned. But there was one person. They were 100% against doing this. In their eyes, we were going backwards by making this change. They didn't see that we could do any quality at all if we didn't have branches that lived for weeks on end so that we could test it into oblivion. And this made for some really interesting retrospectives in the team because we were at such polar opposites. Starting a discussion was really difficult. But eventually, rather than arguing, we did actually start a discussion. And I learned some really interesting things about why he had the reservations he had, why he was insistent that no other company in the world would ever dream of doing trunk-based development, and why we were being reckless to the point of irresponsibility or even negligence. His point was, it is impossible to test anything, no matter how small, if it doesn't live on those branches. We can start in the future, but we need a perfect system before we start. We need a full test suite, a full unit test suite, full integration test suite, full end-to-end test suite. And without this perfection, we shouldn't even be considering starting. That's not going to work. We had a huge code base with a lot of legacy code in there. Some of it was more than a decade old. It wasn't suitable for unit testing for historical reasons I'm not going to go into tonight. And we're not going to be changing that code to test it. And we're not going to be writing tests for the code, which isn't changing, does work, and does what it's supposed to do well. So we're never going to hit this perfect state. We need to be pragmatic about this. But I was sure that we can do some small changes. Let's start with something really simple, do the change, see what we learn, and then try and grow it organically to the rest of the things. The team agreed with this. We thought we'd give it an experiment. We'd try it, see what happens. And one thing that we knew is that we needed to improve our test coverage whilst we were doing this. And we'd already been making progress on this over the last few months, working on a best effort basis to try and add more and more coverage to the code that we had. It's a huge issue with that. Best effort is just not good enough. And it's not good enough because as soon as you get a deadline, as soon as you get something with priority landing on your plate, pressure from the business, the whole best effort goes out of the window. It's the easiest thing to rationalize away. So our best effort basis, we're simply making life worse for each other, but more slowly than before. We knew we had to change this. So we decided that on that day, we were going to make sure that every pull request we made had some sort of automatic testing associated with it, so that we didn't have to do all of our regression testing manually at every stage of our process. Now, this terrified our tester. As I say, we didn't have any test coverage, and some of the code really not suitable for unit testing at the time. And he saw lots of work piling up on his desk as the developers just plonked everything in front of him. Historically, that was reasonably accurate. The test system that the test team used, developers couldn't access it. We couldn't write tests, we couldn't run tests, we couldn't even see the results of tests. Thankfully, the test team had seen the problem that was causing, and they were also in the process of changing themselves and improving. And they'd moved to Cypress, which is JavaScript, TypeScript these days, code. As developers, we can now make our own tests. We can use our tester to validate our thoughts, to help us figure out what we need to test, and not just to pile up the work on his desk and make him responsible for everything. We came up with a good plan of action. We went to lunch to relax, and then we came back for our sprint planning where we could actually do something about it. We came back, we started to look at the stories for our upcoming sprint, and it should have been a reasonably easy sprint planning session. We're in the middle of some big features. We know exactly what we had to do. The biggest discussion point was going to be what is our sprint goal and how we're going to put our stories into our sprint backlog. What jigsaw are we going to make? Only something else came up too, a little bit of housekeeping. Can happen occasionally, whether that's a third-party API that's changed, and if you don't change your application, then it's going to break. Local laws that change, so if you don't change your application, you're no longer compliant. And something like this came up at this point. The product owner told us about it, said this is really important. It's not yet urgent. If after you've made your jigsaw, there is space to put this in, I would love it to be in. But the things you're working on right now, they are more urgent. Don't stress too much about this. And at that point, a colleague of mine gave an answer which I've heard before, no doubt I'll hear again. Well, how about we just skip the test for this simple test? Because then we can just jam it in anywhere. It's only going to take a few minutes to actually do the test. I was shocked. I was not impressed, and I may even have sworn just a little bit. 2 hours. 2 hours since we decided to change our development process. To help us make our changes more reliably, to help us give ourselves more trust in our changes, and to help us work in a more fluid way. 2 hours. And here's somebody suggesting we drop that discipline before we've even started. And he's not doing it because of laziness, not because it's difficult. He's actually doing it because he wants to help the business make this one change more quickly. But there's implications to this, of course. All of our other changes would have been so much more complicated if we'd have done this. Our tester would have been busy manually regression testing this one small change for the developer. So they wouldn't be able to help us think about the automatic checks that we needed. So they would have taken longer, be more complex. Chances are we'd be manually regression testing all of the other changes we made as well. We wouldn't be moving forward at all. And so the gains are really short-lived when you try and cheat like this. You can be really quick cutting corners today. maybe you're okay in a while, but eventually these shortcuts are going to catch up with you, and you're going to have to crawl painfully through the morass of everything which is left over when you do that. And the biggest loser when you hit this is the business, the very person he was trying to help. And again, 2 hours. It was fresh in our heads why we wanted to make this change. And here's somebody already suggesting we change it. Imagine what it's like weeks or months from now when the reason why we do things isn't as fresh in our heads. That's one of the reasons why we fall back into old patterns when we shouldn't occasionally. I really do want to stress, though, that he was trying to do this for the right thing, even if it was totally the wrong reason. And we needed to help him see this. And our product owner was amazing here. She was fantastic. She was very much behind the idea that we'd put forward. She was accepting that we're actually going to slow down in the beginning because we have new ways of working to learn. We have new tools, new syntax, getting used to new ideas, and catching up for the years of missing tests in order to get our coverage ready. She was hoping to get a return on her investment, that after a while we'd get back to our old pace, of course. Only with the knowledge that the existing code is now more easily to regression test, without spending hours doing it manually. If we're not spending those hours, maybe we can improve our velocity in doing this. And we actually got feedback from this way quicker than we were expecting to. And from the team member who was totally against changing the way that we were working to start with. At the heart of the software that we're building was a really complicated algorithm. And it was complicated in what it did, how it did it, and with all of the different services it needed to speak to just to come up with a set of related values. Changing this was always a nightmare for us. If we had to change it, believe me, we tried not to, then it would take a week or so of manual regression testing in order to make sure we'd not broken anything, to make sure the values were correct and the behavior was correct. And a couple of months after we made this change to the way we were working, we need to make the change inside this algorithm. It came up in a daily one morning. Product owner told us we needed some new functionality. And the tester gave us a really stern look and went, "Does this mean you've got to change that algorithm?" And we kind of just looked at the floor and went, "Yeah, it really does." Okay, as long as the automatic test run, it'll be fine. I almost fainted. I really cannot overstate how amazing that made me feel. We'd spent a little longer per change in the preceding sprints, and we had saved a week's worth of manual testing with this one change. And on top of that, we had a much better feeling about how we were going to move forward as well. Now, I'm not going to say that this solved all of the problems that we had around moving with fluidity within the team. But I can say that this taught us that it's okay to spend time today to improve ourselves and knowing that we're not going to see that value back in the future. It's okay not to supply value today if you're going to pay it back later. Now, my second story, it goes outside of my team. It's dealing with a slightly bigger, slightly more complex change, dealing with a wider audience. When we started our process of improving our pipeline before we started to talk to people, we saw the spectrum of technical changes that we needed to do. And we formed a CI task force to try and help us move along here. We took developers out of each one of the teams and asked them on a best effort basis to spend time with the CI team and pick up the different things that we needed to change that no team actually had ownership of. That didn't work that well because it was a best effort basis and everybody's got their own team and their own projects and their own priorities, and it soon gets forgotten. And on top of that, we noticed that we were trying to take small steps across a broad spectrum of things, and we didn't take the next little step until the whole spectrum had caught up with us. And a few of us got together one day and thought, well, we can actually make something meaningful here and actually show what we're doing. We can probably get our releases fully automated for the most part, mitigate those times when we can't fully automate it yet, set up a daily release that needs a limited amount of time from people. Rather than spending half a day twice a week, maybe people can spend half an hour daily and we can get things out faster. We spent an afternoon putting together a plan to solve all the gaps that we had. We spent another afternoon putting together a way to communicate this to the wider business. This isn't something that we could just magically do ourselves. We really needed the business on board here. But at that point, it all kind of went awry. Because before we could discuss the points in the PowerPoint, before we'd even sent it out, to be honest, before we knew people knew that we were working on this, we got the message from the business that they're not going to accept any more deployments than we currently have. Stop doing what you're doing. As one person I was working with said really courteously, that's really disappointing. Me, I was a little bit less than impressed. And I started to write my thoughts in an email, going in a bit more depth about why I thought stopping what we were doing was a bad idea for the short term, for the long term, for the developers, and for the business. But I also noticed as I started typing, what I was actually doing was venting my frustration. But it actually felt kind of good. So I checked who I was sending the email to make sure that it wasn't too dangerous. I put my venting in rant tags to let people know that, this is me letting off a little bit of steam. And I finished the email with a step plan that I thought could help us move forward. I thought this mitigated the whole rant part of things. My manager, not quite so in agreement with me there. So sorry again, Cindy. But the people I send the email to, they actually nodded along with it. They used it to get rid of their frustration as well. We spent an afternoon drinking coffee, complaining with each other, and working our way through our disappointment. We'd actually put a lot of energy into this, and to have it taken away that quickly was just not fun. And sitting and complaining feels really good because we're people. But on its own, it doesn't really do anything. But it did let us get rid of that frustration, and with that stress out of our system, we actually managed to take a step back and start to think about, well, where do we go from here? We started to have conversations with the business rather than just accepting stop what you're doing, really questioning through of, well, why? What are your actual bottlenecks? And it turns out the business, not against daily releases. They actually thought it was a fantastic idea. But they were against the amount of repeated testing that our current process meant they had to do. They had to test in development, in testing, on staging, and then again when we went to production. And the reason why they wanted to keep that to twice a week is they'd rather lose half a day twice a week that they know they're going to lose than not know what they're going to lose daily. They like the planability of what they had. On top of this, there was kind of another issue. If they had to approve a change before we could go to production, they were worried that if you had somebody who was part-time, so not working one day, if they were suddenly ill, if there was a change just before they went on vacation, they could hold up 1, 2, 3 releases for a whole company, and nobody wanted that weight on their shoulder. This is really great information. This was awesome. It's something we can really use. We've got a bottleneck that we can see. It's tangible. We can get our teeth into this. At this point, the disappointment has completely gone. My brain's kicked into gear, and we really wanted to take on this challenge. How can we change our current process, so not just the deployment, but the whole process around it, to not only reduce the burden on the product owner, but also remove them as a bottleneck for the entire release? And after doing some thinking, I realized the only way that we can really do this is to literally just remove them from the release, but find some way to ensure that they could retain trust that what they tested was going to work along the way without them spending time every day making sure this is the case. This is quite a complex problem to solve, and it's not something I can do for an entire department or company in one day. But I can do a small experiment within my team. Maybe we can try some ideas. Even if we can't change the actual process, we can work to our own process inside of that and see how we can help our time and make things better. So I sketched a few ideas out of what we could try and do to keep a paper trail of approval for the auditors, which we needed, and stop the repeated testing that we had, support our move to introduce value more fluidly. By using the automated testing that we'd already started doing, whether that's unit, integration, or end-to-end testing, can we make sure that everything we would do during the release is shifted left? To make sure we prove that if it's okay in development, then we have tests which are going to let us know if it's not okay through the flow. And in doing that, making sure that we can test once and know that it's going to work, our product owner can then actually spend more time doing proper testing. Rather than just checking we're putting a yellow box on the screen, which, woohoo, they can check that that yellow box actually solves the problem that they want to solve. And that gives way more value to the company than simply repeating the tester's work. Only without the same in-depth knowledge that a tester has of knowing how to break a site in a way that I adore testers for. Then we had to struggle with the auditor. We still need to have that approval process in place so I can prove to the auditors once a year that we're not putting untested, unknown things into production. And we actually asked our product owner to start approving our pull requests with us. They were working with us on a daily basis. They were always in the room with us. And if they see something working, then they can approve the pull request. And then when it comes to going to production, we can show the auditor that these pull requests went to production with these tests which were ran and these people that said it's okay for this pull request to go forward. And we actually thought that also provided way more value to the auditor and the companies than simply showing them a list of people who went yes to something. And this had an awesome side effect. Because the product owner knew if it worked or failed without testing, the tester knew if it worked or failed without testing, and the developer knew if it worked or failed without testing, then yeah, we don't actually need somebody to approve the release. If our automatic checks work, then we know we can pretty much go to production. Developers can concentrate on current work. We don't need to context switch back to what we were doing 2 days ago and take us out of our mind zone. Our testers, rather than checking that, yes, this yellow box is on the screen as it should be, they can actually perform exploratory testing, really check that our application has the resilience that we hope it has, and they can help the developers improve their own testing and help us validate our ideas for the next round of automatic checks we need. And our product owner, they can continue to make our already awesome product even more impressive. And we know inside of 20 minutes if we can go to production. Now, I sometimes kind of ask myself whether or not exploding was the right thing to do. Should I have sent that email out? I honestly don't know the answer. But I'm human and I did it. And by limiting the impact to the people who I knew would be able to see it for what it was, and by allowing them to vent their frustration as well, we paved the way to move forward really nicely. Because when we got rid of that frustration, all that we were left with was that adrenaline, that raw energy that came from it. And we poured that into finding a root cause instead of allowing it to just sit and fester inside of us for weeks because we're not allowed to do what we think we should be doing. We used it to help, because if we didn't, it would have been really bad. Now, outside of the obvious things that I saw whilst these situations were happening, I also saw things throughout the process of these experiments and a couple of others that I did about trying to help the department move forward with our experimentation. How I got started, getting other people to join in with me because I don't want to be the only one experimenting, and how to deal with people inside my team, outside my team, and what I had to change about myself. As I say, we learned so much from doing little experiments, but getting started wasn't easy. The way that I did it was trying to find what caused a lot of pain for myself, seeing what low-hanging fruit there is for what I can play around with and see what works and see what doesn't work. And when I picked up these little things, maybe change some process I was doing, maybe change some process that the team was doing, and it fails because it's going to fail. Trying not to get disheartened by it can be tough, but you need to, because you need to be able to take a step back, look at what you've done, look at what needs changing, and then tweak it, try again, repeat the cycle until you have an experiment that's working for you. Use the experience to try and improve yourself. And if you've done a few of these things and you want to try and get other people involved as well, then share your experiments with other people. I did this by doing lightning talks just within my department catch-ups every couple of weeks about experiments I'd worked on, what I'd learned, and tried to let other people see that there were possibilities of playing around with the things that we were doing and changing the way that we work. Hopefully, spark something inside of them so that they can start experimenting themselves. And one thing I really learned is if you're going to do this, if you're going to experiment, if you're going to try and get other people involved, you have got to let your enthusiasm burn inside of you when you do it. You've got to let other people see what makes you so psyched, that knot in the stomach that you get, as somebody described it to me. Each step along this journey, with the successes, the questions when things don't quite go right, and just occasionally, the complete and total frustration because you have an entire department shouting at you for an idea that you came up with, or because you break something. And you've got to remember that not everybody's going to feel this way. If you're trying to improve and trying to change and trying to introduce new things, some people are going to fight you tooth and nail. And that can be really hard to deal with. And one thing I really had to learn is that most of the time, these people, they're coming from a good place. They're not just trying to sabotage any single thing that you do. They care deeply about the work that they're doing, and they don't want to break things for no reason. They may see roadblocks that you don't. The guy that didn't want to try trunk-based development, the business that didn't want to do daily releases. Some of the roadblocks they see are going to be wrong. Some of the roadblocks they see are going to be right. And I learned so much more from the colleagues that actually tried to stop me than I did from the colleagues that went with me, because I needed to learn why they were concerned. And we use that insight to create a new joint approach where we work together. And that eventually led us to a much better place than I would have ever reached alone. Now, I'm not going to lie and say we didn't get annoyed. I think we both got really frustrated with each other. But that joy when you do something that works, if you're doing it with multiple people and you can celebrate it together, it's just awesome. And the final thing that I had to learn, and this one is really hard. Some people, they just don't burn with the passion to try and change things. Some people want to go to work, do their job, go home at the end of the day. We need people like that too. It's fine. But if you are trying to do something, don't let it discourage you, which is easier said than done. Don't let it frustrate you. And if you learn this one, please let me know how that's done. And most importantly, don't let it stop you from carrying on with experiments and trying to improve if that's what you want to do. Thank you for taking this time to allow me to share my experiences with you. I hope you can take some of the lessons that I've learned and then go away and make your own mistakes, learn from them, and then share those mistakes with other people too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stacy. This was really, really brilliant. I'm gonna give you a virtual applause as well. But I
Thank
encourage
you.
people to unmute themselves and clap.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Stacy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
Stacy, is that a TARDIS on the board behind you?
There is indeed a TARDIS on the board behind me.
I love it.
It's the first thing I drew when I made my chalkboard.
I didn't notice that. That's a good eye.
So this is why I like the community. I can do stuff like have a TARDIS in the background and people know what it is. Most of my colleagues just go, what?
Who's your favorite doctor?
That's a tough one. I would probably go with, am I allowed to pick more than one?
Yes. No.
Then I'd go with 10 and 13.
Okay. Oh, Tennant is my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah, it's David Tennant is just fairly awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, that was an off-topic question, but please, I encourage people to ask questions. You can leave them in the chat or ask Stacy directly.
Hi. So you clearly got a love of Doctor Who. So how did that help you with this journey that you went on?
Sorry, I missed the start of the question.
How did your love of Doctor Who help you with the journey that you've been on?
That's a nice one.
Thanks, Nigel. That's a challenging question.
That is a challenging question. You know what? The Doctor faces impossible odds all the time and carries on. And when you're trying to deal with people that are really blocking you and arguing with you constantly, that's a good thing to keep in the back of your mind.
Tenacity, basically.
Absolutely tenacity. And occasionally just making me wish I had a TARDIS so that I could actually go back in time and give myself a bit extra. And correct mistakes that I've made.
Thank you.
Or see the future as well. You know, the TARDIS can go past the future.
Remember the future.
But actually, I think that I really like also your positive attitude when you were facing the challenges, and also when you mentioned that people raise questions and issues for a reason. It's not just sometimes they want to be negative and crush your new ideas and experiments. I think that's very Doctor Who-like as well. You know, see the best in people and listen to them basically.
Yeah, and it's a really hard one to learn because it's the change that you're doing. It's your thing, it's your baby, and someone's trying to come along and break it.
Yeah,
and it's. I am going to say my team really helped with that because we had such a level of psychological safety that we could have really loud shouting matches with each other, and then still go and have a cup of coffee afterwards. So we didn't take things personally. But it still took, I would say, going the bit of the story where I say we had bad retrospectives, we're talking 2 or 3 months. Okay. That took a long time to get through because we were at absolute opposites from each other. And yeah, it's rather bad of me. It took me a long time to actually sit down and listen instead of just trying to get defensive and get my point across and actually like, no, you know what? Let's discuss this properly and listen. It's a really tough thing to do and it takes time.
Stacy, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you said, don't get discouraged if possible, but you haven't figured out how to do that yet. Do you have any learnings about that? Have you noticed any clues about how one might achieve that?
I think the best thing that I can say is it helps if you can get at least one person on board with you. If you are fighting an entire team, then that can be really difficult. And there are some personality types that really get ultra defensive. And trying to work with those people is really difficult. And that's why having at least one ally is really important. Even if that ally tells you you're wrong, it's good to have that person that you can, rather than just getting a straight no back, have somebody that you can use as a soundboard and actually bounce ideas off of and find the right way to go forward.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. It sounds like this is not something to do only when the shit hits the fan, so to speak.
No.
But to make sure you have allies in preparation for when this is going to happen.
Yeah, and it's, I think our architect at my last job, he was really good to work with because he was an architect who was also open to being told, no, that's wrong, and you can have discussions with him about it. And in doing so, it allows you to also say when you're wrong, and you can build up a nice rapport. And yeah, it gives you just that little bit of backing. And when you come up with your ideas, when you find things that you want to change, it also gives a really nice soundboard of, okay, this is my idea. Tell me why I'm wrong. To get some kind of feedback before you actually get started.
Yeah, very nice. Have you figured out any tricks for identifying such people?
Oh, I know you're not supposed to say this, but that's also a really good question.
Thank you.
The best way that I can put it, it was actually the architect that said to me about the whole knot in the stomach thing when you're making changes. And the best that I can say is look for those people who do get really excited. Because the people who get really excited are probably the ones that you can use as a soundboard. Also, be careful not only to surround yourself with the people who get really excited, because otherwise you're in an echo chamber.
Of course. Thank you, Stacy.
But they're good people to get started when you... The people who you work with who go to meetups, who watch Scott Hanselman talks and get, oh, this was really cool. Do you think we can possibly do something like this? Even if you don't do anything with it at that time, if you note the people that have that kind of reaction, they're probably good people to get on side.
I'm spying one of my co-workers in here, and he's actually technically on holiday at the moment. Thank you for those answers, Stacy.
You're welcome.
Do we have more questions for Stacy?
I wanted to ask you something about the first part of your presentation. How did you find that changing the development and testing process influenced the structure and the actual tasks the team would take on?
It changed our entire Scrum board, which it wasn't something that was designed. It just kind of happened. Because we had to start with knowing how we were going to test something, we had a super complex board. It was to be done, started, in progress, the void, to be tested, tested, not approved, and our entire board came back down to in progress. Because we had to work together to get this done. If we didn't involve the tester right at the start, then it made our lives really hard. So the other thing that we noticed is it cut down a lot of the bugs that we had. Because, you know, as developers, we were sometimes a little bit guilty of a quick run through and that works and deploying it and giving it to the tester and saying, get on with it. And then he would do one thing which was ever so slightly out of the norm, and it would go kaboom, and he would get furious that we hadn't done any smoke testing whatsoever. And because we started to do this and have those flows set up before we started, it actually cut the amount of bugs that we had, because it's not a bug until we know it works. It's not finished until we know it works, and we tried to make the tester's life as boring as possible.
it also sounds like it increased the amount of collaboration you would get between developers and testers as well.
Absolutely. It's the tester at that point, when he moved on to a new job, the tester we got him as a replacement could do a little bit more coding, and we actually had him pairing with us. So he was actually writing tests and code with us as we were working. And we got to that level of collaboration. It was fantastic.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks.
I do have another consideration, Stacy, because I also like the part when you said that you have no regrets in sending that email.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it was strongly balanced by the fact that you chose the people that received the email. So
Yeah.
you were finding a way to express your frustration, your doubts, etc. But at the same time, you try to, I don't want to say arm, but to involve the right people in that.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much tried to make sure that, as well as my boss, who was the person who sent us the email saying, stop what you're doing, I tried to only include the people that had really been working on this idea to make sure that it was literally the right people. And it was a little bit of a risk. I don't really regret doing it. It turned out well. I would say don't do it too often.
Okay.
It's if you're sending these emails out every week, then it stops being something to help you vent your frustration and starts being another, oh God, not another one of these emails.
Got it. Nice. Okay, so this is the last call. If there's no more questions, I can introduce our next speaker, actually. Thank you so much once again to Stacy. This was really, really brilliant. Are you staying for the rest of the meetup?
Yeah, I'm staying for the rest of the meetup.
Perfect. So if someone thinks about any last minute questions, Stacy is gonna be with us till the end.
Yeah, and if you don't feel like asking it, you can always get me on Twitter at Stacy_Cash.
Perfect.